Hi, I'm Dr. Gwyn Erwin, and welcome back to my channel, Healing for Your Life. Today's video is the 7th keystone in my original model of healthy development, and it will be the last of this series on healthy development. Well, there's going to be one video after this kind of integrating the 7 keystones. And then we're going to turn our attention to what happens to those keystones when trauma occurs. And then there will be another series on how to work with those elements to help resume development in a healthy way. So this 7th keystone is on language and voice. Now you would think those maybe are the same thing, but they're not. And the reason for this is that language is much more a left hemisphere semantic articulated experience, beginning somewhat in the 2s, but really flourishing, as we found out in our last video on hemispheric development, into the 3s and beyond. Language is made up of cultural phenomenon. It is made up of, the cultural phenomenon is in a global sense. It is of our country of origin, and it is within the family. So we have multi-levels of culture influencing the way our language develops. But Noam Chompsky really changed the view of language in our world. And one of the things that he brought to the foreground and helped scientists and developmental experts the world around understand is that we are hardwired at birth to absorb and express language. We have certain capacities that are built in that we bring with us into the world to support the use of our language, whether our language is English or it is Spanish or it is Russian or it is Aboriginal, whatever that language is, we have it in our basic DNA systems when we're born, the foundations to absorb it and then express it. So language is the vocal and written expression in a system of words and meanings to express ideas, to express feelings, to express thoughts, and what we call mental representations, which are sort of like belief systems, but they are the internal structures we develop over time out of our experience that then are very alive in us, and we express by means of those. So language is a left hemisphere articulated semantic experience. It's very linear. We have a thought or an idea and we want to say, I want to go to the store. I want to draw a picture. I want an apple for breakfast. Very linear, step-by-step, semantic languaging that is ordered. Now, this language ideally should support us whether we are expressing feelings while also being able to think about what we want to say and express our thoughts, while at the same time having a rich array of feelings. But this is very dependent on something that comes before the 3rd year of life and the left hemisphere's development and the development of articulated language. And that is what I have called personal voice. So what is voice? It is the vocal and written expression of the person's selfhood. Very different than just articulated language. So this essential self that I call it, and the personal voice of that represents us in language. But it is not the same thing as language. This is how I articulate my selfhood. This is my voice, my way, that is unlike anybody else's in the world. It is unique to us, it's fundamental to us, and it is indispensable to us because it represents our selfhood. It reveals our ability to be self-reflective, to understand and communicate what is most important to us, what is dearest to us or most urgent to us, and to receive in kind that level of communication from another in a dialogue of meaning that is what I call elaborative. So let me give you an example of what Stanley Greenspan called circles of communication. And in these circles of communication, you have a mommy and a baby, or person A and person B, and either one of them starts the circle. If it's a baby, it'll be with a coo, or a gesture, or a squiggle, or a giggle, or a little cry. And then the mother will respond to that baby's signal with her own communication, and the baby will respond to the mother's offering. And that three-part system makes up one circle of communication. Now, research has shown, Greenspan's research showed that by the time a child is about 9 months old, they should be able to do 8 to 10 of those circles in a row in one sequence without breaking contact emotionally to self-regulate. Now, 8 to 10 circles is 24 to 30 pieces of pretty intimate communication. By the time the child is 15 months old, they should be able to do 30 of those circles of communication in a given sequence without breaking emotional contact. How many adults do you know who can have a conversation and a dialogue of 30 circles of communication? This is something I work on with my patients all the time. It is one of the pathways to healing when we get to working with trauma, because what happens in almost all cases of trauma is that personal voice is either suppressed, criticized, repressed, or for long periods of time lost to the individual. Now, that doesn't mean somebody who's been traumatized can't be extremely articulate, because they're two different operations. Voice is of the first 2 years of life. It is based on implicit memory. It is based on our arousal and our inhibitory systems and the combination thereof. And it operates not semantically and linearly, but dynamically, with a lot of feeling. And so you can have somebody who's had a very difficult beginning in life who learns to be extremely articulate. Now, that might be defensive, it might be self-protective, it might be the way to cover their own vulnerabilities, or they've kind of leapfrogged above personal voice, and personal voice to them becomes sort of their articulated language. So don't be fooled or confused by somebody who is very articulate, because that doesn't necessarily mean that their voice is connected to their sense of self. Now, one of the ways you might feel this is somebody can be very verbose and talk a great deal, and you just don't feel connected. You feel like there's a lot of words, but where is the meaning? Where is that feeling of depth? I'm going to give you two kind of brief examples. So Joe and Bob are walking down the street in opposite directions toward each other, from opposite directions toward each other. And they're friends, and they haven't seen each other for a while. And Joe says, Bob, oh my gosh, I'm so glad to see you. It's been forever. And Bob says, yeah, I know. And Joe says, well, I just, how have you been? And Bob says, well, okay, I'm getting a divorce and things are kind of difficult. And Joe says, boy, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope we can get together sometime and talk. And Bob says, yeah, that would be great. And then Joe says, well, good to see you. Sorry you're having such a tough time. And they part ways. Nothing of substance has happened there. Those were not circles of communication in an elaborative dialogue. That was one person speaking articulated language and the other person speaking articulated language. And the rich meaning that could have developed just completely flattened out and stalled. Now let's take another vignette where Joe and Bob are walking down the street, and Joe runs into Bob and says, my gosh, Bob, I haven't seen you forever. How are you doing? I've really been thinking about you. And Bob kind of tears up and says, really? Boy, I could really use that. That means a lot coming from you. And Joe says, well, what's wrong? Tell me. And Bob says, well, I'm getting a divorce, and it's really shaken up my world. I'm pretty upset, and I've just kind of withdrawn from people. That's why I haven't been in touch. I'm sorry. And Joe says, Bob, I would never want you to suffer like that alone. Why don't we get together and really talk this out? I'd love to spend time with you, and if there's any way I can help, I want to. Bob said, well, that would be great. And Joe said, well, let's set a time right now to get together. And Bob says, really? And he said, yeah, I really want to. Bob said, well, I would love that. And Joe says, how about this Friday night after work? And we'll go someplace quiet where we can kind of talk and just spend the evening together. It doesn't have to be all about what you're suffering, but just really have time together. And Bob said, that would mean the world to me, but I really am interested in what's happening in your life too. Now you have a dialogue that is elaborative. They built on one another. And now you have circles of communication that is going to lead somewhere. It's going to lead to connection. It's going to lead to furthering the relationship. And you can see in these two people that instead of getting together for drinks like the first pair would have and just kind of shot the breeze, and one wanting to talk about their divorce mainly and the other one not really wanting to hear or get involved, you have two friends who really can connect and who can appreciate one another and who can share something in a life transition that's very difficult, but out of that also maybe find some really redemptive solutions, and they each can grow from that experience. That's the difference between having only language and having voice and language. I want to bring your attention to one other thing about the development of voice and language and how it develops over time. We begin with what's called behavioral discharge. And this you see in babies, if they are sad or upset, they cry. If they're uncomfortable, they cry. If they're happy, they giggle. If they are excited, they might kick and flail their arms. That is behavioral discharge. But you'll also see that in a toddler who cannot express their feelings and who just go and kick a piece of furniture or hit something or, wail. That also is behavioral discharge. The next level up from him that we want to see in a child in healthy development, because every toddler is going to do that. And so now we want to see as our next developmental milestone that the child has some verbalization about their behavioral discharge. That they can say, I kicked her, I was so mad, or he hit me. And now we have the beginning of voice and we have the beginning of language. The next level up that we want to see developmentally is a description, a behavioral description of what the person wants to do but doesn't do. So you might have a 4 or 5-year-old who now says, I was so mad at Brandon. He took my truck and I wanted to grab him and sock him, but I didn't. That is a tremendous developmental milestone where you have emotional voice about feelings, you have an articulated language about a desired behavior, and you have the balance and the interaction between the excitatory system and the inhibitory system saying, yeah, I was elevated and I wanted to strike out, but I know better and I didn't. That's a remarkable achievement for a 4 or 5-year-old. So now we have somaticized descriptive expressions of feelings, like my heart hurts or my stomach aches. Now, as we learned in the What About Feelings video, we have vitality affects, and so we have not only the categorical affects, like I'm sad, I'm unhappy, I'm surprised, I'm angry, but we also have the vitality affects, and so this is where you're going to see those coming into play around the ages of 6 on up. And it's statements like, I'm coming apart, or I'm falling to pieces, or I feel like I'm flying, or I'm so happy, I'm sailing through the sky. Those are the expressions of vitality affects, and they're very connected to personal voice. The level up from that is you're going to eventually get to the place where you have what we call representational capacities. And this is the ability to represent all of our feelings and thoughts in articulated language with voice underlying it. And this means that we now are the mental images that we form or the imaginative images that we form. We are able to represent those in words in very rich, multi-sensory language. It's elaborative language. It's rich. It's not overdone. It's just rich. We can symbolize our feelings. We can symbolize our wishes. Feelings are communicated across a wide spectrum of affects. Not only the categorical affects of feeling angry, sad, excited, joyous, fearful, humiliated, healed, but the vitality affects as well. But most important is that you get to the, well, I shouldn't say most importantly, but you also get to the place where this is in a shared dialogue of meaning between people who care about each other. And this is the richest part of having voice and language, because language alone is not going to give you meaningful conversations. They may be intellectually stimulating. We may learn a great deal from them. They're full of information or data or experience. They may be even fascinating. But they're more fascinating because the personal voice of the speaker is involved, and their emotional life is involved. And there is this beautiful combination between their voice and their articulated language, so that you feel you really know them and they can know you. And that is the shared dialogue of meaning that can take place between people. So that is our 7th keystone of healthy development. The next video will show how they all interrelate, and then we'll be moving on to see what happens to that healthy development when problems occur. Thank you so much for being with me. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.